The howling wind carried her scream across the Montana Territory as Rose Turner's stagecoach was attacked by bandits in the fading twilight of an autumn evening in 1876. Just 20 years old and already a widow, Rose clutched her small leather-bound journal to her chest as the coach lurched violently to a stop on the dusty road leading to Great Bend, the frontier town she hoped would offer her a fresh start after 2 years of grief. "Hand over your valuables and nobody gets hurt," a masked man shouted, training his revolver on the terrified passengers. Rose's hands trembled as she surrendered her wedding ring, the last connection to her late husband who had succumbed to influenza. The bandits had nearly finished collecting their spoils when rifle shots cracked through the air, sending the robbers scattering into the brush. "You folks all right?" a deep voice called out as dust swirled around a tall figure on horseback. In the dim light of dusk, Rose could make out a weather-worn cowboy hat and the glint of a sheriff's badge. "Sheriff Flynn Donovan," he introduced himself, dismounting with fluid grace despite his tall frame. "Welcome to the outskirts of Great Bend, though I reckon this isn't the greeting you were hoping for." His piercing blue eyes scanned the shaken passengers before settling on Rose. "Are you injured, madam?" he asked, noting how she clutched her journal like a lifeline. "Just frightened," Rose replied, her voice barely a whisper. "They took everything of value I had." Sheriff Donovan's expression softened. "The West can be unforgiving, especially to newcomers. Where were you headed, Great Bend?" "I've accepted a position as the new school teacher," Rose explained, trying to steady her voice. "My husband passed 2 years ago and She trailed off, unwilling to share her complete vulnerability with a stranger, even one with a badge. "I'm headed back to town." "I can escort you the rest of the way," he offered, extending his hand to help her from the coach. By the time they reached Great Bend, night had fallen completely. The small frontier town's main street was lined with a few establishments still showing lamplight: a saloon, a general store, and what appeared to be a modest hotel. Rose shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders as they walked toward the hotel. The sheriff noticed her discomfort. "Something wrong, Miss Turner?" "I've always been afraid of the night," she admitted, embarrassment coloring her confession. "Ever since I was a child, the darkness. It feels like anything could be hiding in it. Foolish, I know." Sheriff Donovan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the street lanterns. "Then I'll bring sunrise early," he said with unexpected gentleness. Striking a match to light a small lantern he withdrew from his saddlebag. "Light has a way of chasing away fears." The warm glow illuminated their path, and for reasons Rose couldn't explain, made her feel safer than she had in years. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said quietly. "Flynn," he corrected. "Just Flynn when I'm not chasing bandits." Over the next several weeks, Rose settled into her role as Great Bend schoolteacher. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building at the edge of town, but to Rose, it represented purpose and possibility. Her class consisted of 15 children ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, each with varying levels of education. Sheriff Flynn Donovan made a habit of walking her home from school each evening, especially as autumn deepened and the days grew shorter. Their conversations started as polite exchanges, but gradually deepened as they discovered shared interests: a love of literature, a passion for justice, and dreams of seeing the untamed West become something more civilized. One evening, as they approached the small boarding house where Rose had taken a room, Flynn paused. "Miss Turner, Rose, would you care to join me for supper at Maggie's Cafe tomorrow evening? As friends, of course," he added hastily. Rose found herself smiling. "I'd like that, Flynn." The dinner at Maggie's cafe marked the beginning of a cautious friendship. Flynn told Rose about growing up in Pennsylvania before heading west after the war, about his 3 years as sheriff of Great Bend, and his dream of someday building a ranch in the rolling hills outside of town. "What brought you here, really?" he asked her one evening as they walked along the edge of town. "Teaching is a noble profession, but Great Bend is hardly the first choice for most educated young women." Rose hesitated, then decided on honesty. "After my husband died, I couldn't bear to stay in our home in Kansas City. Every corner held memories. I needed something entirely new, someplace where nobody knew me as the poor widow Collins. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher here, it felt like Providence." Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the hardest part of grief is how others treat you afterward, like you're made of glass." "Exactly," Rose replied, surprised at his insight. "How did you know I lost my younger brother in the war?" he said quietly. "People walked on eggshells around our family for years. Their shared understanding of loss created a bond between them, and as autumn turned to winter, Rose found herself looking forward to their evening walks, regardless of the early darkness that still made her uneasy. The first snow came in late November, transforming Great Bend into a pristine wonderland overnight. Rose awoke to excited shouts from the children in town and hurried to her window to see the world blanketed in white. School would still be in session, but she knew the children's attention would be elsewhere today. As predicted, her lessons on arithmetic were frequently interrupted by wistful glances toward the windows. Finally relenting, Rose dismissed class early, earning cheers from her students as they rushed out to play in the fresh snow. Rose was gathering her teaching materials when she heard boots on the wooden floor. Looking up, she found Flynn leaning against the doorframe, a playful smile on his normally serious face. "School's out early today, I see," he remarked. "Some battles aren't worth fighting," Rose replied, returning his smile. "Besides, the first snow is special." Flynn stepped fully into the classroom, and Rose noticed he was carrying something behind his back. "I have a proposition for you," he said, bringing forward a pair of ice skates. "Miller's Pond has frozen over, perfect for skating if you're not afraid of a little adventure." Rose eyed the skates skeptically. "I haven't skated since I was a girl." "It's like riding a horse your body remembers," Flynn assured her. "Besides, I'll be right there to catch you if you fall." The certainty in his voice compelled her to agree. They walked to the pond at the edge of town, where several families were already enjoying the ice. Flynn helped Rose lace up her borrowed skates, his fingers brushing against her ankles with surprising tenderness. Rose's first steps onto the ice were wobbly, her hands gripping Flynn's forearms as he skated backward, guiding her. "That's it," he encouraged. "Find your balance." Gradually, muscle memory returned and Rose's movements became more confident. Soon they were gliding across the pond together, her mittened hand in his, laughter echoing in the crisp winter air. In that moment, with the late afternoon sun sparkling on the snow, Rose realized she hadn't thought about her fears or her past for hours. As dusk approached, most families headed home, but Flynn convinced Rose to stay a little longer. "Just until the stars come out," he said. "You haven't seen Montana stars until you've seen them reflected on ice." They sat on a fallen log at the pond's edge, sharing a thermos of hot coffee, when the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "See," Flynn pointed to where the brightest star reflected perfectly on the smooth ice. "Two skies, one above, one below." Rose gazed at the spectacle, mesmerized by the beauty. "It's magical," she whispered, then realized with a start that darkness had fallen completely around them. Yet for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt no fear. Flynn seemed to read her thoughts. "You know what I've noticed. You haven't mentioned being afraid of the night lately." Rose considered this. "I suppose I haven't had time to be afraid between teaching and—" She hesitated. "And spending evenings with you." Flynn's eyes held hers. "Is that a good thing?" "Yes," she admitted. "A very good thing." Their walk back to town was quiet, both lost in thought. When they reached the boarding house, Flynn surprised Rose by taking her hand. "Rose, I know you came to Great Bend to escape your past, not to find, well, whatever this is between us. But I'd like permission to call on you properly. Not just walks home or friendly suppers, but with the understanding that I'm courting you if you'd allow it." Rose's heart raced. She had come to Great Bend to start anew, yes, but she hadn't expected to find someone who made her feel alive again. "I'd like that, Flynn," she answered softly. Flynn's formal courtship of Rose became the talk of Great Bend that winter. He brought her wildflowers that somehow managed to grow in sheltered spots despite the cold, escorted her to church socials, and even arranged for the traveling theater company to extend their stay when they passed through town, knowing Rose's love for Shakespeare. But it was their private conversations that Rose treasured most: discussions about books they'd read, debates about how the West was changing, and gradual revelations about their pasts. Flynn told her about his time fighting for the Union, about the nightmares that still occasionally woke him, about his decision to become a lawman to bring order to the frontier. Rose shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her brief but happy marriage, and her determination to build a life defined by more than loss. As Christmas approached, the town organized a holiday celebration at the newly built community hall. There would be music, dancing, and a special Christmas pageant performed by Rose's students. The entire town was involved in preparations, and excitement filled the air. The night of the celebration, Flynn arrived at Rose's boarding house looking uncharacteristically nervous, dressed in his best suit rather than his usual sheriff's attire. "You look beautiful," he said when Rose appeared in a deep green dress she'd sewn especially for the occasion. "And you look very handsome without your badge and gun belt," she replied, noting how different he appeared without the symbols of his authority. The community hall was transformed with pine boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. Children ran about excitedly while adults gathered in groups, sharing holiday cheer and hot cider. Rose's students performed their Christmas pageant to enthusiastic applause, their faces glowing with pride as they took their bows. When the local musicians struck up a waltz, Flynn led Rose onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was sure but respectful as he guided her through the steps. "I have something for you," he said as they danced. "A Christmas gift, though I'd like to give it to you privately, not here with everyone watching." Later that evening, as they stood on the porch of Rose's boarding house, Flynn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package. "It isn't much," he said, handing it to her, "but it made me think of you." Rose unwrapped the gift to find a beautiful silver pendant in the shape of a sun, with delicate rays extending outward. "Flynn, it's beautiful," she breathed. "To remind you that light always follows darkness," he explained, his voice deep with emotion. "Turn it over." On the back, a simple inscription, "For RT, I'll always bring the sunrise." Tears welled in Rose's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Flynn replied, gently taking the necklace from her hands. "May I?" Rose nodded, turning so he could fasten it around her neck. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, catching the lamplight. When she turned back to face him, Flynn's expression had changed, grown more serious. "Rose, these past months, getting to know you has been the greatest joy of my life." I know it might seem too soon, but the moment was shattered by shouts from the direction of the town bank. Flynn's expression instantly transformed, the sheriff replacing the suitor. "Stay here," he instructed, already reaching for his gun as he hurried toward the commotion. Rose watched him go, her heart pounding with fear and the weight of words left unspoken. The next morning, Rose learned that the Blackwell gang, notorious bank robbers who had been terrorizing towns across the territory, had attempted to rob the Great Bend Bank while the Christmas celebration diverted attention. Flynn and two deputies had exchanged gunfire with the gang, driving them off but not before Flynn took a bullet to the shoulder. Rose rushed to Doc Miller's office, finding Flynn pale but alert, his left shoulder heavily bandaged. "You should see the other fellow," he joked weakly when he saw her worried face. "This isn't funny, Flynn," Rose scolded, fighting back tears. "You could have been killed." "Hazard of the job," he replied, then grew more serious. "I'm sorry about last night. I had planned to ask you something important." Rose took his hand. "And I'm still here to listen." Flynn's eyes held hers. "Rose Turner, I love you. I know we've only known each other a few months, but I'm certain of my feelings. When I'm healed up proper, I intend to ask you to marry me with a ring and on one knee, as a lady deserves." Rose's breath caught. "Then I'll give you my answer now, so you have something to look forward to while you heal." "Yes, Flynn Donovan. When you ask me properly, my answer will be yes." The news of Flynn and Rose's unofficial engagement spread quickly through Great Bend. Most townspeople expressed delight, though a few raised eyebrows at the speed of the courtship. Mrs. Hollister, who ran the boarding house where Rose lived, took her aside for a concerned conversation. "Are you certain, dear? The sheriff is a good man, but marriage is a serious step, especially for a widow still grieving." "I will always honor my first husband's memory," Rose explained, "but Flynn has helped me understand that my heart has room for new love. I'm not replacing what I lost, I'm building something different but equally precious." Mrs. Hollister seemed satisfied with this answer, and soon joined the rest of the town in planning for a spring wedding. Flynn's recovery progressed steadily through January, though Doc Miller insisted he limit his duties as sheriff until his shoulder fully healed. This restriction chafed at Flynn's independent nature, but it gave him more time to finalize plans he'd been making even before his injury. One crisp February morning, Flynn appeared at the schoolhouse during Rose's lunch break, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. "I have something to show you," he announced. "Can you spare an hour?" Rose eyed him suspiciously. "The children will be back soon. I've already arranged for Mrs. Peterson to watch them for the afternoon. Called it a sheriff's emergency," he added with a wink. Intrigued, Rose agreed to accompany him. Flynn helped her into his wagon and they set off toward the hills north of town. After about 20 minutes, Flynn turned onto a narrow trail that Rose had never noticed before. "Where are we going?" she asked as the wagon bounced over the uneven ground. "Patience, schoolteacher," Flynn teased. "Some lessons are best learned through discovery." They crested a small rise and Flynn drew the horses to a halt. Below them stretched a picturesque valley, sheltered by hills on three sides with a small creek running through it. Near the creek stood a partially constructed cabin, the framework already in place. "Flynn, what is this?" Rose asked, though she suspected the answer. "This," he said proudly, "is our future if you still want it. 10 acres of the best land in the territory. I've been buying it piece by piece over the last 2 years." Rose was speechless as Flynn helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the cabin. "It'll have 3 bedrooms," he explained as they walked through the unfinished structure. "One for us, one for guests, and one for—" He paused, a hint of color touching his cheeks. Well, for family we might have someday. There's plenty of good water from the creek, fertile soil for gardens and space for livestock. It's perfect, Rose whispered, envisioning the home it would become. But when did you start building? Your shoulder. I hired the Stephenson brothers to do the heavy work, Flynn admitted. I've been planning this since Christmas, before the shooting. It won't be ready until late spring, but I wanted you to see it now. He led her to where the front porch would eventually be, overlooking the valley. There, he lowered himself carefully to one knee, mindful of his healing shoulder. Rose Turner, he said, producing a simple gold band with a small diamond. I promised to do this properly when I was healed. I'm not fully recovered yet, but I couldn't wait any longer. Will you marry me and build a life with me here? Tears blurred Rose's vision as she nodded. Yes, Flynn. Yes to all of it. The wedding was set for the first weekend in May, when the wildflowers would be in full bloom across the Montana hills. As the date approached, Rose divided her time between teaching, preparing for the end of the school year, and getting ready to become Mrs. Flynn Donovan. The cabin in the valley progressed rapidly, with Flynn spending every spare moment there when his duties as sheriff allowed. Rose often joined him after school, bringing picnic suppers and helping with smaller tasks like choosing where furniture would go or planning the kitchen garden she would plant. One evening in late April, they stayed at the cabin later than usual, lost in conversation about their future as they sat on makeshift chairs outside the nearly completed structure. The roof will be finished tomorrow, Flynn said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Then it's just the interior work left. I can hardly believe we'll be living here in just a few weeks, Rose replied, leaning her head against his good shoulder. As they talked, the sun began to set, painting the valley in gold and amber light. Rose watched the shadows lengthen, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest that came with approaching darkness. We should head back, she said, rising from her chair. It will be dark soon. Flynn caught her hand. Stay a little longer, he urged. I want to show you something. Flynn, you know how I feel about the night, Rose protested, though with less conviction than she once would have. Trust me, he said simply. They remained seated as the sun disappeared behind the hills and twilight settled over the valley. Rose's anxiety grew as darkness enveloped them, but Flynn's steady presence beside her kept full-blown fear at bay. Look up, he whispered after some time had passed. Rose tilted her head back and gasped. Without the lamplight of town to dim them, the stars shone with astonishing brilliance, more numerous than she had ever seen. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a celestial river, and the longer she looked, the more stars seemed to appear. This is what I wanted to show you, Flynn said softly. Our own private night sky. Out here, the darkness isn't something to fear, it's the canvas for all that light. Rose was silent, overwhelmed by the beauty above them. I can't promise to keep all darkness from your life, Rose, Flynn continued, but I can promise to help you find the stars within it. In that moment, something shifted within Rose. The night was still dark, but it was no longer empty or threatening. It was filled with distant light, with possibility, with wonder. I think, she said slowly, that I might learn to see the night differently. Flynn's smile was visible even in the starlight. That's all I've ever hoped for. The first Saturday in May dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union about to take place. Rose dressed in the small back room of the church, helped by Mrs. Hollister and several other women from town who had become dear friends over the past months. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, sewn by the town's seamstress as a wedding gift. Around her neck hung the silver sun pendant Flynn had given her at Christmas. You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Hollister said, adjusting Rose's veil. Every inch a bride. A knock at the door revealed Reverend Thomas, ready to escort Rose down the aisle in the absence of her father, who had passed away years before. "It's time," he announced with a warm smile. "Your groom is looking quite nervous out there." Rose took a deep breath, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led her to this moment, the grief that had driven her to Great Bend, the chance encounter with a sheriff on a dusty road, and the unexpected love that had blossomed between them. The small church was filled to capacity with townsfolk and a few of Flynn's relatives who had traveled from back east for the occasion. Wildflowers decorated every surface, their sweet scent filling the air as Rose began her walk down the aisle. At the altar stood Flynn, more handsome than ever in a new black suit, his sheriff's badge noticeably absent today. His eyes never left hers as she approached, and in them Rose saw all she needed to know that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Thomas speaking about love that blooms even after loss, and the courage it takes to open one's heart again. When the time came to exchange vows, Flynn's voice rang clear and confident through the church. "I, Flynn Donovan, take you, Rose Turner, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand beside you in sunshine and shadow, to cherish your strength and support you in weakness, to seek light with you when darkness falls, and to love you faithfully all the days of my life." Rose's voice trembled slightly as she repeated similar words, adding her own promise. "I vow to face my fears with you beside me, to build our home with love and laughter, and to treasure each sunrise we share." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, sealing their union before God and the community they both had come to love. The celebration afterward was held in the community hall, transformed once again with flowers and ribbons. There was dancing, feasting, and so much laughter that Rose's cheeks ached from smiling. As tradition demanded, Flynn and Rose opened the dancing with a waltz, moving together with the easy grace of two people perfectly attuned to each other. "Mrs. Donovan," Flynn murmured as they danced. "How does it feel?" "Like coming home," Rose replied, "after a very long journey." Later that evening, Flynn surprised everyone by announcing that he and Rose would be departing immediately for their new home rather than spending their wedding night in town. "The cabin is ready," he explained to the curious guests, "and we're eager to begin our life there." As they prepared to leave amid good-natured teasing and well wishes, Mrs. Hollister pressed a basket of food into Rose's hands. "For your breakfast tomorrow," she said with a knowing wink that made Rose blush. The ride to their new home was magical in the soft spring twilight. Fireflies were just beginning to emerge, dotting the landscape with their intermittent glow as Flynn guided the wagon along the now familiar trail. "Are you nervous?" Flynn asked as they neared the cabin. "A little," Rose admitted. "It's been a long time since." Flynn's hand covered hers. "We have all the time in the world, Rose, tonight and all the nights to come." When they arrived, Rose discovered that Flynn had been busy with final preparations she hadn't seen. The cabin was furnished with simple but beautiful pieces, some purchased in Great Bend, others made by Flynn himself. Lanterns were already lit, casting a warm glow throughout the rooms, and on the kitchen table sat a vase filled with wildflowers. "Welcome home, Mrs. Donovan," Flynn said, sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold despite his still healing shoulder. "Flynn." "Your injury," she protested. "Some traditions are worth a little pain," he replied, setting her gently on her feet inside their home. "Besides, I've been practicing lifting hay bales to build up my strength for this moment." Rose laughed, the sound of it filling their new home with joy. Later, as they stood on the porch watching the stars emerge, Flynn's arms wrapped securely around her, Rose marveled at how far she had come from the fearful widow who had arrived in Great Bend less than a year before. "Are you still afraid of the night?" Flynn asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Rose turned in his arms to face him. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore. Not with you." Their first year of marriage unfolded with the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought the planting of Rose's garden and Flynn's purchase of their first livestock, a milk cow, 2 horses, and a dozen chickens that pecked contentedly around the yard. Rose completed the school year in Great Bend, riding to and from town each day on a gentle mare Flynn had selected especially for her. Summer arrived with its long, languid days that seemed to stretch endlessly. Rose didn't return to teaching, having decided with Flynn that their homestead needed her full attention for now. Instead, she threw herself into making their cabin a true home, canning vegetables from the garden, sewing curtains for the windows, and learning to make cheese from their cow's rich milk. Flynn continued his duties as sheriff, though he was increasingly contemplating a change. Great Bend was growing more settled, with fewer of the problems that had initially necessitated a strong lawman. More and more, his passion lay in the land he and Rose were cultivating together. Autumn brought the harvest and preparations for winter. Flynn added a lean-to shed to the cabin for additional storage and built sturdy shelves to hold Rose's canning efforts. They worked side by side, preserving the bounty of their first summer as a married couple. It was during those crisp autumn days that Rose began to suspect a new blessing was on its way. Her monthly cycle, always reliable, failed to appear. Mornings brought waves of nausea that she carefully hid from Flynn until she was certain. By the time the first snow fell in November, there was no denying the gentle swell of her abdomen. She chose a special way to share the news, waiting until they were preparing to celebrate their first Christmas in their home. Rose had knitted a tiny pair of booties, wrapping them in brown paper tied with a red ribbon. On Christmas Eve, after they had exchanged other gifts, she handed Flynn the small package. "One more," she said, watching his face closely. Flynn unwrapped it curiously, then stared at the tiny booties in confusion before understanding dawned in his eyes. "Rose," he asked, voice thick with emotion, "are we?" She nodded, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "In late spring, May, I think, a year after our wedding." Flynn dropped to his knees before her chair, laying his head gently against her belly. "A baby," he whispered in awe, "our baby." "Are you happy?" Rose asked, running her fingers through his hair. Flynn looked up at her, eyes shining. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted, Rose. A home, a future, and now a family." The winter passed slowly as Rose's body changed with the growing life inside her. Flynn became increasingly protective, insisting on handling more of the household chores and limiting his time away from home. He built a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding each piece until it was satin smooth. "You think it's a boy or a girl?" Rose asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Flynn's hand resting on her rounded belly. "A girl," Flynn said decisively. "With your red hair and spirit." "I think it's a boy," Rose countered. "Strong and brave like his father." "As long as our child is healthy, that's all that matters," Flynn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I wouldn't mind a daughter with your eyes." Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, melting snow revealing the first green shoots in Rose's garden. As her time grew nearer, Flynn arranged for Doc Miller to stay in Great Bend instead of making his usual circuit of outlying homesteads. "Just to be safe," Flynn insisted when Rose protested the expense. "I won't take chances with you or the baby." In mid-May, just as the wildflowers were blanketing the hills around their home, Rose went into labor. Flynn rode hard into town to fetch Doc Miller, returning with not only the doctor but also Mrs. Hollister, who had experience as a midwife. The labor was long and difficult. Rose's cries of pain tore at Flynn's heart as he paced outside their bedroom, barred from entry by Mrs. Hollister's firm insistence that men only get in the way at times like these. After nearly 18 hours, just as dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, the distinctive cry of a newborn pierced the air. Flynn froze in his tracks, waiting with bated breath until Mrs. Hollister opened the door, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Sheriff," she said. "You have a son, a strong, healthy boy." Flynn entered the bedroom to find Rose propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile more beautiful than any sunrise he'd ever seen. "Flynn, meet your son," she said softly, tilting the bundle so he could see the tiny red face with its shock of dark hair that promised to be as black as his own. Flynn sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overcome with emotion as he gazed at his child. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's miniature fingers. "What shall we name him?" "I was thinking Robert after my father," Rose suggested. "Robert Flynn Donovan." "Robert," Flynn repeated, testing the name. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." As the summer progressed, little Robert, or Robbie, as they came to call him, thrived in the loving environment of their homestead. He was a contented baby with Flynn's blue eyes and a disposition that was generally sunny, though he made his displeasure known with impressive volume when hungry or uncomfortable. Flynn proved to be a natural father, as comfortable cradling his son as he was handling a gun or building a fence. He often took the baby with him for chores around the property, narrating everything he did as if Robbie could understand. "Your papa is mending this fence so the cows don't escape again." Rose overheard him explaining one day as he worked with Robbie nestled in a makeshift sling across his chest. "When you're bigger, I'll teach you how to do it yourself." Rose's heart swelled at these moments, her love for Flynn deepening as she watched him embrace fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything important in his life. When Robbie was 3 months old, Flynn came home from town with news that would change their lives once more. "I've resigned as sheriff," he announced as they sat on the porch after putting Robbie down for the night. "Effective at the end of the month." Rose stared at him in surprise. "Are you certain? I know how much your badge means to you." Flynn took her hand. "It meant everything once. Now it's just a piece of metal compared to what I have here. Great Bend is growing more peaceful by the day, and Deputy Carson is more than ready to step up. Besides," he added, "I've been offered a partnership in the trading post." "The trading post?" Rose echoed, confused. "Old man Jenkins wants to retire. His son has no interest in the business, and Jenkins approached me about buying in as a partner. I'd manage the store 3 days a week, which would give me 4 days here at the homestead. The income would be steady, the hours predictable, and most importantly, I'd never have to worry about not coming home to you and Robbie." The last words revealed the fear he'd been carrying that someday he might face a situation like the bank robbery that had left him wounded, only with a far worse outcome. "If that's what you want, Flynn, I support you completely," Rose said, squeezing his hand. "I've worried every time you pin on that badge, though I've tried not to show it." "I know you have," Flynn replied. "I've seen it in your eyes. This way we can truly build the life we've dreamed of together, watching our son grow, maybe giving him brothers or sisters someday." That night, as they lay in bed with Robbie sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, from a grief-stricken widow, afraid of the dark, to a wife and mother finding joy in each day and peace in the night. "What are you thinking about?" Flynn asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About that first night we met," she replied. "When I told you I was afraid of the night and you said you'd bring sunrise early." Flynn smiled at the memory. "I meant it then and I mean it now." "You've kept that promise," Rose said softly. "Not by chasing away the darkness, but by helping me find the courage to face it and discover the beauty it holds." Flynn pulled her closer. "We'll face whatever comes together, Rose. Light or dark, joy or sorrow." "Together," she agreed, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the heart that had brought sunrise into her life when she needed it most. As their second year of marriage unfolded, the Donovan family settled into a new rhythm. Flynn transitioned from sheriff to merchant with surprising ease, finding satisfaction in helping the growing community of Great Bend through commerce rather than law enforcement. His fairness and honesty made the trading post more successful than ever, and his partnership with Jenkins proved beneficial for everyone. Rose divided her time between caring for Robbie, maintaining their home, and occasionally helping at the trading post when Flynn needed an extra hand. She discovered a talent for bookkeeping, organizing the store's accounts with the same precision she had once brought to her classroom lessons. Robbie grew from a peaceful infant into an active toddler, his curiosity matched only by his energy. He took his first steps on the porch of their cabin, wobbling determinedly from Rose's outstretched hands to Flynn's waiting arms, his face a picture of concentration and triumph. "That's my boy," Flynn crowed, swinging Robbie into the air as the child giggled with delight. "Strong as his papa and smart as his mama. And stubborn as both of us combined," Rose added with a laugh. Robbie's determination was already legendary. Once he set his mind to something, nothing could distract him until he achieved it. Their homestead expanded with each passing season. Flynn added a second bedroom to the cabin for Robbie, built a larger barn to accommodate their growing livestock, and fenced additional acreage for crops. Rose's garden doubled in size, producing enough vegetables to sell the surplus in town. It was during the autumn of that second year, as they celebrated Robbie's first birthday, that Rose realized she was expecting again. This time, the signs were familiar, and she recognized them almost immediately. Flynn's joy at the news was boundless. "Another baby," he marveled, laying his hand over her still flat stomach. "Robbie will be a wonderful big brother." "I hope it's a girl this time," Rose admitted. "A little daughter to balance our family." Winter settled over their homestead, bringing with it cozy evenings by the fire. Robbie's first words, predictably, "Papa" and "horse" before "Mama." And the gradual changes in Rose's body as their second child grew. Spring arrived with its promise of new beginnings, and in early April, just as the first wildflowers were appearing on the hillsides, Rose gave birth to their daughter after a mercifully shorter labor than she had experienced with Robbie. "She's beautiful," Flynn whispered, cradling the newborn with a tenderness that still amazed Rose. "She has your red hair." Indeed, the baby's head was covered with a fine dusting of copper-colored down, a striking contrast to Robbie's dark locks. "What shall we name her?" Flynn asked, gently rocking his daughter. "I was thinking Eleanor, after your mother," Rose suggested. "Eleanor Rose Donovan." Flynn's eyes misted over. "My mother would be honored," he said softly, "and I can't think of a more perfect name for our perfect girl." Little Eleanor, or Ellie as she was quickly nicknamed, proved to be as different from her brother in temperament as she was in appearance. Where Robbie was bold and adventurous, Ellie was thoughtful and observant. She watched the world with wide green eyes that seemed to miss nothing, content to sit quietly in Rose's lap while Robbie raced circles around them. "She's just like you," Flynn observed one evening as they watched Ellie examining a flower petal with intense concentration, always noticing the details others miss. "And Robbie is your miniature," Rose countered, smiling as their son attempted to lasso a fence post with a piece of rope, mimicking the technique Flynn had shown him. Their family complete at least for now, Rose and Flynn found themselves living the dream they had barely dared to imagine during those early days of their courtship. Their homestead flourished, their children thrived, and their love deepened with each passing day. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley in vibrant hues of orange and gold, Robbie and Ellie already asleep inside, Flynn turned to Rose with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if those bandits hadn't attacked your stagecoach that night?" Rose considered the question. "Sometimes. I might have arrived in Great Bend without incident, started teaching, and we might have met anyway under more ordinary circumstances. Or we might never have had that moment, you admitting your fear of the night, me promising to bring sunrise early," Flynn mused. "It's strange to think that something so frightening led to everything we have now." "Life has a way of bringing light out of darkness," Rose said, leaning against his shoulder. "That's what you taught me." Flynn pressed a kiss to her temple. "You taught me something too, you know. Before you, I was just going through the motions, being sheriff, doing my duty, but not really living. You showed me what it means to build something lasting, something worth protecting." As darkness fell around them, neither moved to light the lanterns. Instead, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast Montana sky. "Are you still afraid of the night?" Flynn asked softly, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night years before. Rose smiled, linking her fingers with his. "No," she replied. "Now, when I see the darkness, I only think of all the stars it reveals and the promise of sunrise to come." In that moment, surrounded by the gentle night sounds of their homestead, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through pine trees, the soft creaking of the porch swing beneath them, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. Not in a place, but in the heart of the man beside her, who had kept his promise to bring light into her darkness, one sunrise at a time. Over the next 5 years, the Donovan family's story continued to unfold against the backdrop of Montana's changing landscape. Great Bend grew from a frontier settlement into a proper town, with a bank, a school large enough to require 2 teachers, and even a small hotel catering to the increasing number of visitors passing through on their way further west. Flynn's partnership in the trading post evolved into full ownership when Old Man Jenkins decided to move east to live with his daughter. Under Flynn's management, the store expanded to include farming equipment and building supplies, becoming essential to the region's development. Rose found herself drawn back to teaching, accepting a position at the school when Ellie reached the age of 4. She taught 3 days a week, balancing her professional calling with her commitment to their homestead and family. Robbie, now 6, grew into a confident, outgoing boy who inherited his father's natural leadership abilities and his mother's love of reading. He started school with enthusiasm, quickly becoming a favorite among his classmates and teachers. Ellie, at 4, was a thoughtful child with an artistic bent, spending hours drawing elaborate pictures and creating stories to accompany them. Her red hair, which had darkened to a rich auburn, was usually adorned with wildflowers she collected during her explorations of the homestead. The Donovan property itself had transformed from a simple cabin with a few acres into a prosperous small ranch. Flynn had added a proper barn, expanded their livestock to include a small herd of cattle, and built a workshop where he crafted furniture in his spare time. Rose's garden was now the envy of the county, with neighbors often stopping by to admire her methods and ask for advice. It was during the autumn of their 7th year of marriage that Flynn received a letter that would present an unexpected opportunity. The territorial governor, impressed by Flynn's reputation for fairness and integrity, offered him a position as a circuit judge for the region. It would mean travel, Flynn explained as he and Rose discussed the offer after the children were asleep. A week or two each month, riding between the smaller settlements that don't have their own magistrates. You'd be wearing a badge again in a way, Rose observed. Is that something you want? Flynn considered this. I miss serving the community in that capacity sometimes, he admitted. The trading post is successful, but there's something about upholding justice that speaks to my soul. And as a judge, I'd be preventing trouble more than facing it, less dangerous than being sheriff. The children and I would miss you during those trips, Rose said, but we'd manage. This homestead runs smoothly even when you're in town all day. I haven't said yes yet, Flynn assured her. Your opinion matters most in this decision. Rose took his hand. Flynn Donovan, you have supported every dream I've ever had returning to teaching, expanding our home, trying new ventures. How could I do any less for you? If this judgeship calls to you, then you should accept it. Flynn's eyes shone with gratitude and love. What did I ever do to deserve you? You brought sunrise early, Rose replied simply. And you've been bringing light into my life ever since. The following spring, Judge Flynn Donovan began his new role, traveling the circuit of small settlements across the territory. His reputation for fairness and common sense made him respected even by those who found themselves on the wrong side of his rulings. He took no pleasure in harsh sentences, preferring to find solutions that served justice, while giving wrongdoers a chance to redeem themselves when possible. During his absences, Rose managed the homestead with calm efficiency, teaching at the school, caring for the children, and keeping their home running smoothly. Though she missed Flynn terribly when he was away, she took pride in her independence and the strength she had developed since those early days in Great Bend when she had feared the dark. The children adjusted to their father's new schedule, making his returns home occasions for celebration. Robbie collected stories to share, while Ellie created elaborate drawings depicting events that had occurred during Flynn's absence. One warm June evening, as Rose sat on the porch waiting for Flynn's return from a 2-week circuit, she reflected on the journey their lives had taken. From their first meeting on that dusty road to the rich, full existence they now shared, every step had led them to this moment, a moment of contentment so complete it almost frightened her. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts, and she rose to her feet, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Flynn's familiar silhouette appeared on the horizon, his horse moving at an easy trot down the lane toward their home. Papa's home, Robbie shouted, bursting out of the house with Ellie close behind. The children raced down the path, competing to be the first to reach their father. Rose watched as Flynn dismounted, dropping to one knee to gather both children in his arms. His laughter carried across the yard, the sound of it warming her heart as it had since the first time she heard it. By the time Flynn reached the porch, Robbie clinging to his back and Ellie perched on his shoulders, Rose's eyes were bright with unshed tears of joy. "Welcome home, Judge Donovan," she said, her voice tender with love. Flynn set the children down gently. "Go wash up for supper," he told them. "I need to greet your mother properly." Once the children had scampered inside, Flynn pulled Rose into his arms, his kiss expressing everything words could not: the longing of separation, the joy of reunion, the enduring love that had only grown stronger with time. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "And I you," she replied. "The nights seem longer when you're away." Flynn leaned back to look into her eyes. "Are you still afraid of them?" Rose smiled, touching his cheek gently. "Never. You taught me to find the stars in the darkness, remember, and to trust that sunrise always comes, no matter how long the night." "Always," Flynn promised. "As long as there's breath in my body, I'll bring sunrise early for you, Rose Donovan." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, with their children's laughter spilling through the open doorway and the Montana sunset painting the sky in glorious color, Rose knew with absolute certainty that the frightened widow who had once cowered from the night was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had learned to embrace both darkness and light, finding beauty and purpose in each. And beside her stood the man who had made it all possible not by chasing away her fears, but by helping her find the courage to face them, to move through them, and ultimately to discover the strength that had been within her all along. Together, they had created something precious, a love that illuminated their lives like the first rays of dawn, chasing away shadows and bringing warmth to every corner of their existence. A love that had taught Rose that while darkness might fall, it was never permanent. Sunrise always came, sometimes early, sometimes right on time, but always, always certain. In the years that followed, the Donovan family continued to thrive. Flynn served as a territorial judge until Montana achieved statehood in 1889, after which he was elected to a formal judgeship that required less travel and more time at home. Rose eventually became the headmistress of Great Bend's growing school, implementing progressive educational ideas that made the institution a model for the entire state. Robbie and Ellie grew into accomplished young adults, each finding their own path while remaining close to the homestead that had shaped their childhood. Robbie followed in his father's footsteps, studying law and eventually opening a practice in Great Bend, while Ellie discovered a talent for medicine and became one of Montana's first female doctors. And on quiet evenings, long after their children had established homes of their own, Flynn and Rose still sat together on their porch, watching darkness fall over the valley they had tamed together, no longer afraid, but grateful for all the stars it revealed, and for the promise of sunrise that always, without fail, arrived exactly when they needed it most.